Anthony Natif, the investor that has defied all odds, because we know we deal with businesses every day. This thing of the starter, the owner, the beginner's syndrome, it's my business. And so, Anthony, share with us, how did you even think about it? How did you make a decision to sell your baby, your thing? And how can Ugandans begin to build businesses that can actually survive them and be able to sell them? So if you can combine that and tell us how you sell. How do you sell a business?
Thank you so much. First of all, I wanted to stand, but given my lack of height, there might be no much difference. So I'll talk while seated. I also want to point out something. I do not have a doctorate. I have a master's degree from the University of Washington. So I had someone encourage people to go and get an American education. I think I would sign off on that. That's the school that taught me how to think in a certain way. So I sat and listened to Mr. Ngabirano talking about people dying with companies, multi-million-dollar entities. They build them, they commit their life's work, and then they end up with nothing. They die and leave their family with nothing. Oftentimes when we're building companies in Africa, we think that the best thing to do is bequeath it to your kids. I also heard him encourage, I think a friend of his, to have kids in the company and maybe go on vacation and let kids run it. Maybe kids don't really want to run that company. They may just want to be photographers. So, and that should be okay. And note that I'm pushing back on his point, but that really is the fundamental flaw in the thinking in our society as of entrepreneurs. When you look at Uganda, I'll barrage you with statistics. We really cannot afford to do anything else but build sustainable businesses. Because Uganda, as you know, is the second youngest country in the world with a median age of 15.7. The only younger one is Niger with 14.8. And when you look at the African median age, it's 19. So we still have a leg up on the rest of Africa in terms of producing young people. More than 48% of Ugandans are below the age of 15. So it therefore means that almost every year you will have 1 million Ugandans at the very least being employment ready. But then the employment market has maybe about 20,000 formal sector jobs. When you go back to URA and look at the number of individual teens that they offer, which means that that person is in position to pay payee, they are less than 1 million. They are around 800,000 people. So where are the rest of the people going? The math does not work. So it's inevitable, therefore, that Uganda will show up when you're naming when you're creating a list of countries that are the most entrepreneurial. So we are only next to Ecuador in that department, where you find that at least 28% of Ugandans will have a claim to being entrepreneurs. Ecuador has around 30 or thereabouts. What they're really counting is the total early stage entrepreneurial activity. If I get a kilogram of ground nuts and I want to be like Mr. Sam's and go and fry them and sell them on the street, I'm going to be counted as an entrepreneur. But in that regard, it means I'm nurturing a dream that could turn me into this gentleman, Mr. Ngabirano. And I have a multi-billion-dollar business. But I cannot sell enough G-nuts as an individual to be able to reach him. He has done this for the last 15 years. He has first mover advantages. You understand? So how do I grow as fast and try to catch up with him? It simply means I need to get partners on board. Otherwise, I'm going to collapse. When you look at the East African landscape, we do not have shortage of financing for businesses. We just have a shortage of entrepreneurs who are open to taking on partners. So if you don't take on partners, it simply means you're accepting to share the pain of entrepreneurship alone. And let me tell you, let no one ever lie to you. Nothing is more emotionally debilitating than entrepreneurship. It is the ghetto. Because when you look at entrepreneurship in this country, 80% of our companies will die before their second birthday. And 15% will die before the third birthday. By the fifth birthday, you're facing odds that are worse than the worst cancer in the world. And I know that because I have a history of working in cancer. So what gives you the fortitude to believe that I'm going to start this thing and I'll defy odds that say by year 3, I will be dead? You do not have much options except to face poverty because, you look around, it shouldn't be surprising that at least 40% of Ugandans have no interaction with the markets. They have nothing to sell. So the reason for this is because we have a mindset that believes that success should be, I have started something, I have built a 4-bedroom house in Nigeria, I have a second-hand Japanese car, my child goes to Kampala parents, I can rent an apartment in Kira for my third chick or second chick, and that's success. You understand? Our definition of success is so low, but if we get back to the drawing table and say, look, if we are going to grow Africa through entrepreneurship, because that's the only way, then we need to think about how to build businesses that are going to survive as entrepreneurs. My own story is I started Guardian with $50,000. Within 2 years, 1.5 years, we're turning over $2 million through organic growth because we entered a market that needed a different look and feel of pharmacy. So I brought my experience from the US and set up a pharmacy that wouldn't look out of place on a street in Boston. So the market voted with us. I got excited, went on an expansion drive, had no board, had no one. I was the alpha and omega. And before long, I almost tanked. I nearly couldn't make payroll. I couldn't pay suppliers. I had grown to like 15 stores in very fantastic locations. When you look at Guardian, it's the most nicely located retail pharmacy chain. It's not by accident. We were deliberate about picking those locations, using numbers, using all sorts of market intelligence to be able to get good locations. But then we didn't have financing, and the cost of money in this market is at least 30%. If you're buying money at 30% in the formal sector, in banks, you have to be selling cocaine to make it work. You guys are in here, but you're going to face these same odds. You might be selling G-nuts. Mr. Ngabirano is showing you can sell G-nuts and become a billionaire. But there has to be a structure you have to follow to be able to get to that point. Anyway, so turnover $2 million. I walk into this bank. I have a contract with Bank of Uganda. I need to supply a drug of $50,000. I have showed these guys that, I am getting this medicine from Turkey for $18,000. Yes, I turn over $2 million, but I need $10,000 because I don't have this liquidity. And the banker looks at me like I was mad. But anyway, long story short, she says, your numbers can support this borrowing, but do you have a complete house? I didn't have a complete house. Because at that time I was probably 27 or something ridiculous like that. I didn't have a house. Only my daughter probably had a house. But that was also an insurance thing, a very stupid one for her. I was like, okay, let me put something here so that when I mess up in this entrepreneurship thing, my daughter will not suffer because of the mistakes I've made choosing entrepreneurship over a comfortable job in Seattle. But anyway, they refused to give me the money. I switched banks a bit. They gave me the money. I supplied, but still I continued the bad habits of expanding without knowing my bottom line, without having a board in place, without knowing how much money I was making. I was just opening stores, getting supplier credit, putting, selling, not knowing that, one of the biggest risks as an entrepreneur who is growing might not be lack of financing. It could be, you can't scale customer service. You can't scale company culture. I started that Kabalagala branch with 5 people. They're like family up to today. But then you suddenly have 200 people. They don't know you like that. So they will sell your stock, go and set up their own pharmacies. It's human nature, it's self-preservation. So how do you put those controls in place? Mr. Ochiti spoke about systems. I wanted to come to the stage and give him a hug. Don't expand unless you can manage that growth. Don't take a loan unless you know for sure where you're going to put it and how that money is going to return. Stress test your assumptions. And then and only then will you be able to grow. But also, eventually when I run out of areas to borrow money without complete houses, so inevitably, my greed for expansion, it's not like I was taking the money and gambling. My greed for expansion meant that I was now broke. The fancy shops I had no medicine. So I was in a situation where you've put up a fortune to buy a Ferrari and you're stuck in Mabira. So you're stuck with this Ferrari in Mabira and midnight is coming. These guys are going to show up, beat you up, kill you, and take your Ferrari. So what do? There's no one who is going to give you $500,000 for Ferrari. You still sacrificed everything to be able to build this dream. So I could have quit and gone back to the US and pursued my plans of the PhD and maybe becoming a professor, which is what I wanted to do growing up. My grandmother would have been very proud. But here I was stuck in entrepreneurship. I'm in the middle of Mabira. So the quickest decision to do, because banks couldn't touch me with a badge pole, was look for private equity financing. Do many of you know what that is? So I had to look for a guy with a gas station, and I say, you know what? Put 200,000 shillings. This is a $500,000 car. Put 200,000 shillings. I'll even give you majority ownership in this vehicle. Let's drive it to Jinja. When we get to Jinja, we'll get people who are willing to rent this Ferrari for $10,000 a weekend. We shall make back the money. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the humility that takes? To get then someone on board, and that someone can actually fire you from your company for sneezing. Do you guys understand how much humility that has to take? But it's one of the best decisions I ever took as an entrepreneur, because I learned so much from these people. The way we run business for survival here isn't the way business should be run. Okay? If you want to run a business for it to be in existence, to serve your people 30 years down the road, you have to run it like it's separate from you. You are not an extension of your business. Your business is just to make sure you meet certain needs in your life, provide for your people, make you comfortable, and solve a society need. I set up a pharmacy in Mbale, and my uncle, a 70-something-year-old, used to go there and buy from it. And then one time on a phone call, he said, you know what? Tony, I was told you're a pharmacist. I'm like, yes. Man, there's this pharmacy in Mbale where I go. I used to look for this drug. I would have to send for it from Kampala, and it was very expensive. Now I have it in Mbale. I'm from Mbale. I'm Anafa. I get it from Mbale at nearly half price. Those guys are amazing. I'm like, which pharmacy is that? And it's like, it's Guardian. I'm like, oh, that's my pharmacy. Sorry, I forgot to tell you. Do you know how gratifying that is? That as a public health practitioner, I had the option of sitting in fancy offices in the University of Washington and talking about how East Africa has 30% medicines counterfeit. And then everyone would give me plaudits and they would call me professor because I presented fantastic papers. I chose to come back, roll my sleeves, and do something about it. Now Guardian serves nearly 2 million prescriptions every year. And that's gratifying. So, and has, I think, 300 employees last I checked. It's nationally spread. So, when we came to sell, I probably didn't have 100% control over the decision to sell. By you taking people's money, you agree that when someone comes and is giving you a good deal, you all sell. There's tag-along and drag-along clauses. If you choose to build your company to take on partners, make sure you take on those partners when you're in a very good financial footing. Because if you're stuck in Mavira and you have a Ferrari, I'll give you 50,000 and say, this is the money we need to cross to Nalufenya. There's a total there. And I need half. And you'll have no choice. So as entrepreneurs, Please keep that in mind. When you're firing on all cylinders, that's the time you get partners. Because however big you get, you're going to need those partners. Bill Gates, the guy we used to laud for the longest time as the richest man in the world, he controls barely 5% of Microsoft. But how much impact has he had on the world? He's balling, he's enjoying himself while solving intractable problems that he's passionate about. So we need to think in that direction. And I encourage every one of you to think about that. Lastly, I'm really sorry I'm taking a lot of time. When you look at the financing landscape in East Africa, to be honest, banks are not suddenly going to come and play buddy-buddy. They also have shareholders they answer to. And like any business, their first duty is not owed to you, the customer. It's owed to their shareholders. So if someone can take money at a higher price, like our government does, it's the biggest borrower in commercial banks, it disincentivizes them from having to negotiate with you to give you an acceptable loan facility. So you need to understand that in this market, you're on your own. So think outside the box. I'll tell you that I'm happy to share this report, but anyone can actually Google it. The East African Venture Capital Association recently published a 10-year report that looked at the landscape of business financing in the East African region. And $8.6 billion was placed in East African companies, at least the deals they were able to capture. And of course, deals like mine were just out of that. Because they happened just before they issued that report. But of those deals, more than 74% went to the Kenyan market. 8% came to Uganda. And we are said to be a more entrepreneurial country than Kenya. Where is the mismatch? It's because probably you do not have forums, many forums like this, and I have to applaud guys at Enterprise Uganda for putting this together, so that tubazu kusa. So we wake you up to the possibility of that exists beyond you thinking you need to be the alpha and omega of your kingdom. If you want a kingdom, start a nice family and run it like you own it. Don't start an enterprise. There's a reason it exists as its own legal entity. So look into the angel investor spaces. Prepare your company for financing. Put structures in place. Don't have 3 sets of books, one for the taxman, one for your investor, and one for yourself and your wife. Please.
Thank you very much, Natif, for that very passionate. I think he's given us a lot of nuggets that each one has picked. But what comes out clearly, stands out, is the critical thinking, being able to challenge the status quo, asking questions. Unfortunately, our education system doesn't teach us to think, right? We are given, what the lecturer gives you is what is the gospel truth. And when you try to challenge your lecturer, that's a problem. And so for those in the education sector here, we need to train our children to think critically. But also, you talk about the humility. You didn't really have a lot of control in making that decision. But I think what I want to flip it and say, when you are at crossroads as an entrepreneur, when you are facing some big pain that Ms. Ochichi said, what decision do you make at that point? Do you stick to 100% of your small cake and let it go? Or do you say, let me reduce my stake, let me take 20% of the bigger cake, have somebody, and let's continue serving the cake. And so I think that the decision you made was very commendable, to shrink your stake, but to keep the cake being served. So I have 20% of the bigger cake that I once had 100% of, but the cake is being served. And I think that's the lesson for all of us. What decisions do we make when we are faced with pain, when we are at crossroads, when we are at a point when we can lose our businesses? And it takes humility to do that. And I'm sure he's already brewing now. He's learned lessons and he's probably starting up something that, that is even bigger than this that he started. Thank you. I'll give you 2 questions. One on succession planning And then the other is, do you do research at the start? Do you need a business plan? How do you start off?
Interesting. At the research bit, in the field in which we are, you cannot do that business without doing research. In retail pharmacy, location is the name of the game. So I learned this much earlier. You guys see like thousands of pharmacies every day, hundreds. In your communities, there's lots of pharmacies. You drive past them, and they are struggling. But there's also companies that are thriving. What sets them apart? Why is it that everyone fights to be in one day gear? Why don't they go to Kidepo or something? So in Guardian, I learned early on, and I had friends who worked in telecom companies. That was when mobile money was becoming all the rage. So it was easy to ask a person, not to give you specifics per se, but to go like, man, where do you do your biggest mobile money transactions in Kampala? And then they will say, Muyenga, they will say, Chibuli, they will say Ntinda, they will say Bwaise, and then you get down to what of actual volume. And then that will help you, sorry if you come from Bwaise, that will help you then say, maybe Bwaise is not the best place, I should set up a pharmacy now. Then you go into the neighborhood that you've selected and you say, well, where is this shop positioned? I see people set up retail businesses and I will say, well, that thing is going to fail if a competitor just comes to the opposite side of the road. So just even the side of the road you put your business is either going to make it or break it. I'll give you an example of Kabalagala if you're associated with, say, John Rich. When you're traveling to Gaba, Kansanga there's a big, nice, frankly, they are very good people, John Rich supermarket. But then if I set up a similar structure on the opposite side of that road, do you think they'll remain with clients? If I just mirror them for look and feel, service, and product range? No.
What's wrong with their location? Current location?
So it's the side of the road on which they are. So people are coming from home, going to office. When they're going to do their shopping, if they're going to John Rich, they'll have to cross traffic. So you have to make it easy for them to get off the road and buy from you. A lot of the businesses that you see leading the world now, their business model is convenience. Amazon exists solely because it sold convenience. That I don't want to go to a store somewhere, I don't want to drive an hour to go out and get this product. I can sit here on my computer, click, get the stuff. And you know, Barnes & Noble started struggling. So clients do not want to be inconvenienced when they are spending their money, even when the need is as serious as healthcare. So you have to be sure that the location you pick is founded in research and proper information. So yes, to answer the question, research is important. If you don't do it, it will show eventually. You might get lucky once or twice, but luck runs out. The other question was what? Succession planning. I have a daughter. I love her so much. I don't love her enough to wish that she should run my companies. I'm sure she also doesn't love me enough to believe that she should help further my dream. I got her as a proper accident of birth. Could have been anyone. She has her own dreams, she has her own desires, she has all these things. My job is to be a custodian until such a time when she's ready to fly on her own. If she wants to fly in the general direction of my company, she will have to earn the shares or wait until I bequeath them to her. If she has to go set up a business, I need to make sure I'll give her a loan. I can write it off later on. Now, the problem is we as parents, we want to show so much love to these children and expect that they should also show us so much love by believing in our dreams. Then we hand them companies that we've put everything on the line for. You've lost relationships, you've lost career, you've lost sleep, you've gotten depressed. And when the child doesn't take on this, you feel disappointed. Don't set yourself up for failure. Just separate the company from the individual. And I have friends who, mainly in the Indian community, one of the richest family in Tanzania, they've been in business for more than 200 years. They do not inherit those businesses on account of birth. If there's a CFO position and you're a family member and you've gone to, say, London School of Economics or London Business School, the only thing your genetics helps you with is to be shortlisted. But you compete for those positions like anyone else, because you see, if you cannot fire someone because you will struggle to sit on a dinner table with them and have a meal after as parent and daughter, don't hire them because they are your relative. If you hire them for their competence, so that when they mess up, you comfortably fire them as a CFO and have them back home as a daughter. Okay? Now, you owe it to posterity to not run a business like your family. If you do that, accountability is never going to happen, because if you cannot hold someone accountable without the blackmail that comes from sharing genes, you cannot run a successful enterprise. Yes, there's something to be said for mentorship, because if these people are interested in what you're building and they want it, they are going to have greater benefit because they share time with you. I'm like the godfather of pharma in this market. So if my daughter got up tomorrow and said, I'm interested in pharma, she has more access to me than any other person who might be more brilliant, who might be more hungry. You understand? But because of that constant access to me, she benefits from my networks, she benefits from my experience, she benefits from my failures and my successes. So over time, that person will be more qualified to run a pharmaceutical entity on their merits. But they first have to show interest. I don't have to force it on them. That's why these businesses collapse. A patriarch of the family or a matriarch of the family who was running these empires dies, and the thing collapses with them. Suddenly, you find out that, oh, this man had billions of shillings in loans. But yes, you find that those loans were going back 20 years and this person was somehow managing them. So they died and didn't pass on the relationships that helped them manage those loans. So it means these people who are owed money come quickly to call in, and when they collect, you haven't passed on these skills. It dies. But if you've been running this on a proper system, it really means that continuity is going to happen. By the time I left Guardian, I was only needed there once a week to attend a 1-hour meeting on Monday. If those guys called me 3 times a week to help solve a crisis, someone wasn't doing their job. I have an Excel sheet where I would log the calls I've got that were work-related. And I drew a graph, and it went like this, and that is how I validated my system of mentoring people and allowing them to make mistakes and being vulnerable before them. And then later I realized these guys knew how to run this company better than me. If anything, if someone was to invite people to talk about how to run a pharmaceutical retail chain, I wouldn't show up. I have like 10 people in my company, my former company, who can give this talk better than I could. My daughter, even if she was as qualified, I'm not sure, she didn't put in the time, if she would be ready. And I cannot, in good faith, cheat my investors and say, here, because you're my daughter, run it. My job is to shepherd people's money. My job to her is to parent her, give her opportunities in life. Those two are different. The issue of formalizing, if you're going to build a business that is going to attract outside capital, you have no choice. You need to formalize. You're not going to get people to invest in some kwara stuff. So you must formalize as early as possible and create a history of running a proper entity. Otherwise, oftentimes people think that I will not formalize now because URA is going to come and tax me out of existence. That is just you showing your ignorance of how the tax regime works. It's important that you educate yourself on how taxes work, on how registration works. Shut you down because you say the truth. It's just that oftentimes people want to lie. There's also an option. If you're growing from within, you're rolling in that capital, you're rolling it over. It's actually very difficult for you to declare an income if you're doing that, for them to be able to, with a straight face, tax you. I'm not saying that the taxman won't do it, but oftentimes they just go off script and do whatever they want. But they are logical. Anyway, parting thoughts. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to people. I wish I attended sessions like this growing up. I made so many mistakes in building companies, and I hope that my next journey is going to be smoother. And I'm extremely happy for you guys that you get to listen to guys from Enterprise Uganda, and they open their doors for trainings and mentorship and stuff like that. Take it up. Find a mentor. Find something. Find someone to talk to. But also on the mental health aspects, you're going to run mad. I'm telling you, truthfully. I do not hear people talk about it. But entrepreneurship is very difficult. You're going to run mad. You get up on Monday, the landlord has served you an eviction notice, your staff want to be paid, they have genuinely worked hard, they expect money at the end of the month, and you have no money. And the guys who owe you money, they say, man, the check bounced.
Some money.
Yes, and there's nothing you can do. So find people you can go to for mental health help.